Okay, so hello everyone. My name is Annalise, and I'll be the chair for this session, which is the Personalized Learning Interaction Framework in Practice Children Implementations according to Chief Learning Officers and Learning Leaders, presented by Helen Fake. And we will have around 5 minutes in the end for your questions, so please feel free to put them on our chat. And that's it. Welcome, Helen.
Hello, thank you so much. I'll get started by sharing my screen. So bear with me 1 second while I go ahead and do that. It's wonderful to be here, and I want to begin with a little time traveling by transporting us back to 2016 to 2018 when there was this tremendous amount of buzz about personalized learning. So if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, the term personalized learning was at its peak. Big companies like Meta and Microsoft were launching personalized learning initiatives in the K through 12 context. And this strategy alone was this silver bullet that was going to revolutionize our struggling school systems and how we went about teaching and learning. And as you know, that's something we face a lot in our field. So I'm Dr. Helen Fake. I'm here to present the research that my dear mentor and friend, Dr. Dabbagh, and I have conducted about the personalized learning interaction framework, specifically what we've learned, what's currently in practice based on our theoretical framework that we've developed that's foundational to our 2023 book. We'll begin by setting the groundwork of the broader context of what's happening in the industry. And then I'm going to talk to you about personalized learning, what it is and why we think it's promising, discuss what research has been conducted to date, and then delve into the research of what's happening in industry now, followed up by a case study I'm currently conducting to improve at my organization. So I want to continue by talking a little bit about the pace of change. Now, we all know about this. I think this is a kind of conservative estimate. The software engineers now redevelop skills every 12 to 18 months. We're seeing this tremendous disruption of technologies like LLMs and artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things. And it's making the half-life of skills decrease and making it more and more critical that we're constantly and continuously learning. The Future of Jobs report that came out in 2023 estimated that 6 in 10 workers will require training before 2027. So this need is tremendously great. And of those CEOs surveyed, according to Conklin, 71% reported that skill shortage would be their most significant business challenge. And a lot of money is on the line with the skill shortages. There's 85 million jobs unfilled, according to projections, translating to about $85 trillion worth of money. That's quite a big figure. And there's a tremendous amount of employee expectations when it comes to training and development programs and opportunities. 84% of employees in a recent edX survey expect that those opportunities are going to be offered by the organizations. And many workers also may not have access to the training programs or the time to continually complete training and development. And if we look at even more data, and despite this explicitly defined need, one of the largest challenges instructional designers and learning professionals face is that learning engagement is one of the biggest problems, according to the 2023 Training Industry Report. So I just wanted to take a quick moment to ask you if you feel up to it in the chat. Which of these challenges is your organization struggling with? Is it a lack of resources? Is it budget cuts? Is it that learner engagement that we're seeing from this survey, or a lack of return on investment, or trying to integrate those learning technologies? So I'll just give you a second, and if you feel like chiming in, that's great. If not, we know what the research says. All right, well, I'll keep moving on. Learner engagement has traditionally been cited as a major problem for learning programs. Thompson et al. Had an article that identified that one of the biggest challenges they found was getting learners to make time for their learning. So we have a clear need for training and development, a hungry set of leaders who want change, a lot of money on the line, a set of people that say they're willing, but those actions aren't aligning with expectations. So what's happening here? According to Downs, it may be how we've structured these very training programs that we've created. He's an advocate for redesigning current training and development programs. He states that one of the biggest obstacles is that we're trying to translate the traditional classroom into this context where an individual can self-direct their learning. The internet and all of the different informal resources we have, whether that be TikTok or Reels, can help you connect with the resources you need to accomplish the tasks that you have in mind. So 52% of learners are seeking information at the point of need, on the go, just in time, in informal places. But many corporate programs focus on centralized learning management systems. And I can't recall the exact person who said this, but I love this quote, that learning management systems are really effective at administering learning, but not necessarily facilitating the transformational aspects of what training and development can do for an individual. They depend on outdated analytics that don't meet the contextual needs of a modern age where learning is on the go and is an expectation of busy professionals. So they fail to capture those informal learning activities. And I know there's been a tremendous amount of focus and energy from the Defense Acquisition University, from learning engineering, from XAPI to try to capture those informal experiences. And yet the centralized location of these platforms don't take into account potentially communities practice, reading books, attending networking events, responding to blog posts, attending workshops like these, or presentations and conferences like these, mentorship or coaching opportunities. And therefore, workforce development programs based on these legacy systems struggle to keep up with the modern day needs of learners who can embrace free or informal resources like TED Talks, YouTube, micro-credentialing platforms, meetup groups, you name it. Since these modern day pedagogies no longer support the role of a student as a passive recipient of information, Downs offers a series of design considerations that he encourages us to follow when we're thinking about revamping and changing our training programs, and to encourage increased activity and engagement within online learning spaces. And according to these parameters, online programs should activate prior learning, count for learning styles, encourage engagement, support knowledge formation, and nurture community. And as Downs proposes, one strategy to address the challenges faced by practitioners in the training and development industry and to increase that engagement is through personalizing learning to meet an individual's development needs. Personalized learning has been shown to have significantly higher levels of customer satisfaction across different industries, retention and loyalty to products and service, and it may translate to increased learner engagement and increased retention of knowledge that employees are facing in their current roles. So the results in sales and marketing and education suggest that personalized learning may be an effective strategy for increasing the value of training resources, reduce the time spent locating relevant information, and support an employee's continuous learning and development. Here's what the literature is telling us too. In addressing the pace of change for reskilling and retooling, we're seeing statistically significant improvements in math and literacy scores in K through 12 literature. And higher education, we see minimized cognitive load and proficiency in language learning, statistically significant improvements in program completion and satisfaction rates, increases to motivation. And then in the workplace learning literature, increases to loyalty, satisfaction, and engagement. So there is a lot to be said about this as a strategy potentially to address the need to change the way that we are currently delivering workforce training and development. But in doing that deep dive of the literature to understand how different groups define personalized learning, and as Shemshak and Spector recently confirmed in their 2023 paper, the definitions are just all over the map. And excuse me, it's a 2020 paper. There are differences in what is being personalized, who is conducting the personalization, and the types of data sources that are being used to personalize learning and how it's going about. My dear colleague and friend, Dr. Gallagher, has come up with this continuum of personalized learning on a spectrum. And what I really want you to focus on is this spectrum here, systems personalized versus self-personalized learning. And this is where we're going to spend a lot of our time. There's some different perspectives across the literature about whether the system should be controlling what becomes personalized for you, or if the individual should be in charge of their learning process. Now, as somebody who's been in human-computer interaction and from that psychology perspective, I'm going to lean more towards that self-personalization. And you're going to see that most of what we're advocating for in this model is the learner being in the center of the learning process. And that's what we've heard from experts as well. So we'll dig into that a little bit more. But more and more, we're seeing that there are initiatives to try to get the system to personalize without an awareness and of the individual involved. And that becomes a big concern. Ben Schneiderman out of the University of Maryland has talked about this a lot in his human-centered artificial intelligence and trying to push people towards more human-centered design, that we really need to make sure that humans are in the driver's seat when it comes to these initiatives. So at the same time, many chief learning officers and higher education professionals have reported difficulty in implementing personalized learning into their workforce training and development programs. According to interviews, they're generally really excited. They love this idea, but it becomes harder to know where to start. And so there were different ideas of what personalized learning meant, just like the literature, and a lack of structure and frameworks. So while leaders could not articulate, there was a tremendous amount of excitement, leaders could not articulate a clear vision of how to design, implement, or evaluate personalized learning. And that's where Dr. Dabbagh and I's research came in. We got to work. In order to investigate this space further, we did an in-depth research study and revealed a framework of personalized learning that can be implemented on an organizational level. We had 3 rounds of Delphi feedback with 224 meticulously selected experts. They were leaders in the field, and we were curious about how they conceive of personalized learning as a learner-centered strategy. And they not necessarily, that's not how it was framed, but they conceived of personalized learning as a learner-centered strategy driven by content and social interactions and underpinned by an ethos of flexibility and learner choice. This research resulted in a framework that I'm going to share with you just coming up in a second. And that emerged from also multiple peer-reviewed research study, the Delphi study I previously mentioned, and our book. So we'll go into what this framework looks like next. This framework builds from Moore's theory of interaction. The model emerged as a means of personalizing learning at an organizational level, and the framework posits that creating a sustainable personalized learning ecosystem involves cultivating a series of interactions to include the learner to the content, the learner to other learners, learners to small groups, learners to mentors, coach or AI coach, and learners to community of practice or social network. This research suggests that effective personalized learning programs support and facilitate these interactions between the learners and the outside world that go beyond the design of content and extend to the development and nurturing of productive and collaborative learning relationships. Again, this was grounded by the iterative expert review of 224 leaders, and it posits that creating that personalized learning ecosystem as a learning experience designer is about making sure those opportunities exist. And so the role becomes less of trying to make sure that people have the content they need when they need it, but that they also have those social interactions and those opportunities to engage with other practitioners, with other people trying to learn the space. So I did want to give a second to have you think and start noodling on what elements of this interaction framework, if any, exist in your environment. And that was the question that we had for learning leaders. What, if anything, already exists in current training and development programs? So here were the research questions that helped us think through this research. How do learning leaders perceive the importance of cultivating different skill sets within their organization? So how do they value this? What types of skills are learning leaders prioritizing? What types of training opportunities do learner leaders offer through their programs? And what types of learning interactions are represented in current training programs? The thought behind these questions was to see, is this theoretical framework happening in practice? And it may help us give an analysis to an organization to get a sense of if they are supporting personalized learning and ways that they might start moving their organization into that direction of personalized learning. And it would also help us gain an understanding of current chief learning officers, their perceptions on training and development, and what kind of the state of the union was for just that kind of thought process. So I'll go a little bit into the method. To gain a better understanding of current practices of learning leaders, we sent a 12-question Qualtrics survey to 23 participating students and alumni of a Chief Learning Officer's master's degree program from a Mid-Atlantic university. Program candidates are typically learning leaders within their organizations. They have 6 or more years of experience in learning development space, and it's strengthened by their instructional design expertise. Many of these master level candidates lead training to programs at their current places of work and function as chief learning officers of their division. We're going to explore the specifics of their titles and roles in the results section, but just to give you a little broad overview of who we're talking to as part of this survey. So following HSRB approval, a Qualtrics survey was administered on Thursday, October 26th of last year via a QR code. We sent it to participants following a presentation about the PLIF framework at an in-person and on-campus workshop for master's degree program participants. An additional follow-up email after the course solicited more feedback from the students, and we had 12 initial responses after that class and follow-up communication. And we felt like we needed some more. So we sent an additional survey to 73 recipients of the CLO program's alumni mailing list. There was a 28% open rate and a 4.1 response rate. That brought us to 37 responses total. Only 23 of those responses were completed. So incomplete responses have not been included in this analysis. So let's talk a little bit about the results. First, let me describe our audience. Our survey responses suggested that learning leaders had a variety of organizational roles. They characterized themselves as professors, learning directors, chief learning officers, program and project managers, deans, a chief clinical officer, and even a training specialist. 2 participants did not specify their roles, and so the results going forward will more align with the questions. But next, I did want to talk about organizational representation because this kind of is an important facet of this research. Of the respondents, 12 were from various departments within the Defense Acquisition University. 2 were from the Department of Defense, and a remainder represented both governmental and private corporate entities. These included the Department of Veterans Affairs, AARP, Trumpet Behavioral Health, the Marine Corps' Microsoft, the United States Department of Agriculture, and the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency. When it came to perceived importance of cultivating different skill sets, we can see that 91.3% of learning leaders indicated that soft skills were either very important or extremely important to their organization. That's a huge number. This differed from the 73.9% of learning leaders indicating that technical skills were either very important or extremely important to their organizations. When asked directly which was valued more, soft skills were deemed more important than hard skills for this population. And in general, 95.7% of learning leaders felt that training was either important or extremely important to the organization, which is not super surprising given the participants' choice in profession. For the next question, we have, what types of specific skills are learning leaders prioritizing? And so here's your graphic of soft skills, technical skills, and training in general. So we can see that soft skills are more valued. What types of specific skills are learning leaders prioritizing? We can see here that leadership came in very high, 86.9%. Communication as the next one, teamwork, project management, and analytical skills. When it came to hard skill training priorities, the most commonly selected areas of focus included data analysis, an other category, software development, cloud computing, and customer relationship management. Of those who answered other, and it's important to unpack this one since it's such a highly voted upon one, they mentioned project management, cybersecurity, healthcare, and some domain-specific skills, such as agricultural knowledge that would be specific to that industry, and then investigation skills. For research question number 3, what types of training opportunities do learning leaders offer through their programs? The most common ways training programs were offered were through virtual instructor-led training. 100% of organizations supported that type of training and development. Next was workshops and seminars, webinars, and then instructor-led training. 87% offered an in-person option. And finally, self-paced e-learning modules. No training leader reported using the Internet of Things or augmented reality for their programs, and only 4% mentioned leveraging virtual reality, mobile app learning, or entrepreneurship opportunities. And for research question number 4, what types of learning interactions are represented in current training programs? Of note, a surprising number of the interactions were self-reported as supported in training and development programs. So learning leaders indicated that the following interactions were present in their existing learning ecosystem. The learning to content interaction with around 91%, learner to small group interaction with 91%, learner to learner interaction, 74%, learner to mentor, coach, or AI assistant, we had around almost 70%. And then learner to social network or community practice was almost around 57% of organizations. Notably, no organization can claim a learner to Internet of Things interaction. It'll be interesting to watch that as time goes on. So I do want to take just a quick moment to check in on the chat and then also get a sense of what types of learning interactions are represented at your organization, or do any of these findings surprise you? All right. Well, if none of them surprise you yet, we'll get into the discussion and a little bit more into the what this means. What can we take away from all of this data, and what actions can we leave this session thinking about and moving forward with? This survey indicates that many of the interactions of the PLIF are by learning organizations surveyed in the study. It's an extremely encouraging result from my perspective because it suggests that many organizational training programs may be more prepared for offering personalized learning ecosystems for their workers than they realize to help them in that process of reskilling and retooling. Based on the responses, all interactions except the learner to Internet of Things interaction are represented, and comments suggest these organizations offer rich opportunities and resources that could foster a learner-centered, sustainable learning environment. Further research is necessary to understand if structured, scaffolded, and implemented application of a PLIF would be better support the effectiveness of training and development programs. Next, I want to address this issue about the 57% of those using communities of practice based on the sampled survey respondents. We see that there is way less comparatively participation in these types of forums, and it was less prominent compared to other interactions for this audience. And given the fact that a majority of the participants may be in more sensitive and classified government roles, the decreased presence of social network or community of practice interaction makes a little bit more sense. There's lots of reasons for this. Previous studies indicate that employees could be blocked from visiting or confused about company stances on participating in a community of practice. The lack of access and clarity can result in less engagement with the learner to community practices interaction. And there's also some organizational and higher level legislation, such as the Hatch Act, that may make government workers a little bit more wary of engaging on these types of platforms that support cross-company sharing. When it came to coaching programs, when we looked at the comments, we also learned that there's more of a focus on executive coaching programs with less of a focus on daily programs. Partially, that's due to the fact that coaching programs can be very resource intensive, but it may be a future opportunity of focus for research, especially with the advent of AI coaches. You can see here I have a Burson article about AI-enabled coaching. It's a hot field. There's a lot more to come in this space. And we've seen some really exciting results and significant results from Luo et al., who did a study with 420 sales representatives at two fintech companies. They were able to increase their sales effectiveness and performance gains considerably by offering an AI-enabled coach to support middle-tier employees. And what they found was all ships rose when they had access to this AI coach, but that people on either end of the spectrum of low performers or high performers required a little bit more attention from an individual to help coach them through what the AI coach was trying to support them in doing. What's also encouraging is that the results suggest that learning leaders value soft skills much more than hard skills. This perspective is consistent with views espoused by leading chief learning officer publications, with the advantage that hard skills are more easily and tangibly measured, whereas soft skills are a little more amorphous and harder to define. But it's perceived as being more critical to creating a competitive advantage. So the type of skill sets learning leaders indicated were most in demand are also consistent with other reports, to include LinkedIn Learning's report of the most in-demand skills, for which communication, customer service, leadership, project management, and management for soft skills and data science, computing, AI, cybersecurity, and UX design for hard skills. So you can see that they're listed here, and communication being the second in this survey. Leadership coming in as number 3 from these articles, as number 1 from these surveys. So there is some overlap over what we're seeing from this survey to other sources. When it came to the types of training being offered, the majority of participants referenced leveraging a mix of synchronous and asynchronous blended learning solutions for training. So that's the use of instructor-led training, whether that's virtual or in person. Workshops and seminars and webinars, instructor-led again, and self-paced e-learning modules. So while many of these popular forms of training delivery could incorporate the different learning interactions, it's a little unclear which interactions are enabled in these individualized programs. So these very popular ways of delivering training may incorporate learning interactions that can't be captured in the survey. The user comments suggest, however, that learner to learner, learner to group, and learner to content may be leveraged in these sessions. But more research, as I mentioned, is necessary to understand how these trainings are structured. And it would be curious to observe if these sessions are set up for more passive engagement, or if they offer active learning opportunities that leverage social interactions and foster interrelationships between the attendees. The survey results regarding the types of training being offered also suggest that there are still opportunities to innovate with newer formats of training, to include project-based learning, apprenticeship programs, group coaching, entrepreneurship opportunities, mobile app-based learning, virtual reality, augmented reality, conferences and trade shows, peer learning programs, book clubs, workbooks, social learning, and leveraging the Internet of Things for learning. Fewer than 20% of the respondents indicate that learning opportunities were offered in these organizations. So there's lots of opportunities in this space to try some new things and see how they translate to better outcomes for our employees who are looking to reskill and retool. And it should also be noted that many of the respondents for this survey were from the Defense Acquisition University. And while the roles suggest participants were from different departments, the self-reported responses may be more reflective of that organization and of government organizations in general. So expanding the scope of the participant pool will further strengthen the results of this study. And we need more research to understand if other organizations structure their offerings similarly, and whether or not those instructor-led programs enable further interactions than we'd even realize. And with that, I do want to focus on the next dimensions of this research. Next, I want to report on some of the ongoing work we're doing to create templates so that we can turn our book into a practitioner's guide. If you are interested in implementing personalized learning within your organization, what we want to do is be able to set you up with the toolkit that you need to make that happen. And we believe that making it easier through templates, that you can revamp your training programs for personalized learning and development. Other types of opportunities are to test and evaluate a personalized learning scale self-assessment based on the usage of interactions. I have a personal theory, and I'm very curious for us to start pulling this thread of, if you are an expert, are you going to be more likely to engage in more of the interactions? And if you are more of a beginner, if you're more focused on certain areas of our interaction framework. Next is to explore if the usage of the PLIF is organically present in intensity audit samples. So entrepreneurs, high-performing employees, field experts. That may help us determine how we might scaffold the usage of the PLIF to support somebody in developing that learning ecosystem for themselves. I'd like to take the next few minutes to go through a case study of what we're trying when it comes to the PLIF in action at my current organization. So as a little context, after joining a lab to develop an AI-enabled human sensor network, following Knevin's theoretical principles, which is a very interesting perspective of how we might gather data in new ways through more engagement through comments and through surveys, and a kind of a mixed method approach towards understanding program effectiveness. I was connected with one of the people in my organization in learning leadership. We discussed Dr. Dabbagh and my theoretical framework, and the organization said they were interested in seeing if we could leverage this thinking to benefit Flexion as a whole. They authorized me to conduct a 3 to 6 month experiment to move the needle forward on developing more career workforce training and development resources at the company. So as a first step, the experiment began with an audit of what the company currently offers as training and development opportunities. We used the PLIF framework to document the available learning to learner interactions, learning to mentor, coach, or AI coach, and so on and so forth. And we also captured what was being personalized, who was involved, where the opportunity was made available, when learners could engage with that opportunity, any available measures, and the types of technology based on Dr. Dabbagh's work on meaningful online learning to support these types of programs. You can see here some examples. We have a peer coding program. That's partially what's being changed, or what's being personalized is delivery and assessment. So how the code is delivered and how it's being assessed. Who is involved? Well, it's a learner to learner interaction. So we know that it's a one-on-one kind of setup. So individuals are interacting with each other, and it can happen in person, online, or hybrid contexts. When does it happen? Well, it would happen typically during business hours. And that by going through line by line all of the different offerings, training offerings we have at Flexion, we're able to define what gaps there are, what opportunities there are, where we're currently focused our personalized learning, and then move forward with a game plan of how we might want to advance training development within the organization. From this audit, we found many elements of the PLIF already represented. I am hopeful that that's going to be the case across organizations as we move forward with this initiative. So the good for Flexion's program is the organization supports many interactions already. There's options for live and then just-in-time learning. And there's a lot of personalization based on the content that's available. So you can self-select your content, and also how the content is delivered, whether that's, through your cell phone, whether you're accessing it a different way. And then there's a potential to collect a multitude of learner data. However, we're not quite there yet. We haven't started collecting that learner data. When it comes to areas of opportunity, in Flexion's existing ecosystem, there's no learner to mentor, coach, or AI interaction. And there's also no learner to Internet of Things interaction. Just like our survey results, learner to social network or community of practice could also be strengthened. And there's no asynchronous programs to facilitate connections between learners. What we saw also in this audit and analysis is that few programs focus on assessment or evaluating efficacy of programs, and no assessments really currently focus on performance. So these are places that, as an organization, we can revamp and think through how we might further support the different programs within Flexion's ecosystem. And as learning experience designers, our role can be either to talk through what those types of programs could look like, or also surface what already exists. And one of the biggest challenges we've seen within the organization is that there is a tremendous amount of resources. However, it's hard to know for an individual where they exist. And so the hope is through this type of audit that we are then able to surface or bubble up all of the different training opportunities that exist within the virtual environment. So from this audit, I was authorized to form an 8-person cross-functional team, which we call a squad at Flexion. This image depicts an activity associated with our initial kickoff session. And in this session, we began by talking about personalized learning and why we thought it was helpful to training and development initiatives. I shared my background and interests, and we discussed what learning meant to the participants. Afterwards, the squad members were challenged to think about a topic they were learning about currently, and then see how or if the PLIF has been leveraged in the development of their learning ecosystem. So you can see some examples here. They're really tiny, but a couple of people were interested in gardening, for instance. And so they were talking about how they were using Instagram reels and TikToks, and they were talking to their neighbors and friends about this, that they had joined some groups, that they were taking some Udemy classes on how to optimize their gardens. And so as they filled out their PLIF, they were able to see how they were already using all of these different, this myriad of resources to help them create the sustainable ecosystem to move forward with their training and development in that topic area. I then presented the findings of the audit along with the theoretical framework associated with self-regulated learning, the premise being that the more interactions that are unlocked in the PLIF, the more likely there's an increase in mastery. And now that's a theory that we have currently. And we revisited all the PLIFs to see if this pattern emerged on its own based off of our self-perceptions of our current learning environment. So I asked people to really reflect and through a self-analysis, try to understand, how do I perceive myself in my level of mastery of this topic? And how much am I leveraging all these different interactions in the PLIF as it stands? So we have this theoretical framework here that more interactions will unlock as you increase mastery, and some ideas of when you might want to incorporate different elements of the interactions, depending on your perceived level of mastery. While we'd be given a specific curriculum that leadership wanted us to develop as a part of this squad formation, and it was specifically how to be better consultants, the team decided that this top-down approach didn't align with our perceptions of human-centered design. And so we wanted to go back to talking to users, talking to learners within the organization. And we were anxious to revisit the premise of how we might implement the PLIF and what might be the best way to move this initiative forward for the organization. So next, we conducted some interviews within the organization, and we used that data to identify problems within our existing training and development programs. Sorry, did somebody want to say something? Okay.
Yeah, I think you can continue. Sorry, I think it's the internet, any issues, but no worries. You can continue.
Okay. So once we identified problems, we then clustered those problems into categories. And it may be too small to see, but the thematic changes or challenges were that many employees were associated with finding resources. So like finding all of the rich resources that we already had on hand. There was a lack of existing organization and difficulty accessing those resources and experiences. There was a lack of clarity of who the experts were within the organization. We had difficulties finding time to do training and development, and a lack of understanding of what meaning and value was associated organizationally with these efforts to reskill and retool. So beyond self-motivation, it wasn't clear to employees what pursuing additional training opportunities would translate for them within the organization. Would they get recognition? Would they be celebrated? What does it translate? What's in it for me is something we say a lot as instructional designers. So what's the WIFM? We identified and clustered these problems, and then we started to brainstorm solutions to these problems, which was followed by dot voting as the easiest way to perceive how to move forward with the quickest wins that could drive the most value for the organization. And this is the first iteration of what we've come up with and where we've landed. And of course, this is continuing to evolve and will continue to evolve. But where we landed was that we should operationalize the development of a PLIF through a self-experiment. I have 6 different people at Flexion who have decided on a goal, a learning goal. They've met with me to discuss that goal. We've tried to make sure that it's time boxed, that it is something that they can achieve within a month, that it's a SMART goal, that it's measurable, and that they've defined the different resources, the experts, the different pieces of the puzzle that they want to use in order to develop a professional plan of how they're going to move forward. So the first iteration has been a general plan, and then playbooks and overarching PDFs have been developed to kind of support that. And what you can see is that we do have these post-it notes, which help to kind of show you the iterative nature of how we're moving about this program. So giving you a little bit more into the structure of how it's going so far, the parameters of the experiment, and I kind of touched on this, is that each participant has elected a beginner's learning goal and met with me as a quote unquote learning coach individually. We've had a session where we set learning goals. Those have been self-defined. They've been specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, and they need to be accomplishable within a month. One of the neat pieces of working where I work too is that you do have 4 hours. We've talked about the pressures of time, and many employees say that time is one of the reasons they're not investing in their training and development. Well, at Flexion, one of the advantages and benefits of being there is that we get 4 hours a week to focus on our training and development. So there is an incentive there. But that helps create a little bit of a sense of you have 16 hours to accomplish a goal. Let's think through what that scope looks like in developing your training and development goal. The other thing is we had this coach role that I've been functioning as, and that coach's role is to identify experts depending on the proficiency and the perceived proficiency of the individual. That coach also is supposed to connect users with resources or learners with resources, assessments, accountability metrics, help them focus the scale, and ensure it's clear when the learner is done with their learning process. That role is also intended to negotiate accountability and to find how to celebrate an achievement with the learner. And in this first round, what has become really interesting and something that I think will be dependent on the organization and the culture of the organization is kind of what we're learning and going through this process. First and foremost, there is a desire within the group to transition not from learning coaches for this interaction, but to accountability buddies. There has been some concern that within the organization, expertise is just not culturally accepted. It's culturally challenged concept at Flexion. The existing pilot group indicated a preference for meeting with that buddy instead so that it didn't feel as top down. And that's partially because the organization is hierarchically flat, or that's something that they strive towards. So having this accountability buddy makes it feel less that you're in a managerial relationship and more so that you're working with somebody that's on the same level with you, trying to achieve something in a way that feels more comfortable. Next is that accountability is a big piece of making sure that these training plans go well. So when it came to accountability, we needed to model strategies to keep that at the forefront and make sure that it's negotiated with your accountability buddy and connected with your ultimate goals. So in yesterday's session, while we were talking about what worked and what didn't work and developing our individual PLIFs, we discussed how we should brainstorm some ways to identify how we can make sure accountability is a part of the conversation. And in doing so, what I think we're going to move towards is almost check boxes of here are different accountability strategies we know that work from the perspective of the literature, but also just in general, or what has worked well in certain circumstances. Which ones are you going to leverage in order to make sure that you're meeting your goals? And finally, celebration. Behavioral theory suggests that gamifying this process may help support habit formation. And this is something that's come out as part of what at least this team is looking to do, is to actually take what has been something that has been less defined and make sure that we're acknowledging and celebrating the training and development that's happening within the organization. So in our brainstorming session yesterday, we also discussed how to encourage participants to treat themselves based on meeting their learning goals. And that could be anything from identifying conferences that perhaps the organization could support you going towards, to finding a new book that you might want to read, to even just celebrating the people that helped you on your learning journey and helped you along the way. So this is the part of the presentation that we did want to invite you to take this survey if you'd like to, so we could get a little bit more information. What's happening in your organization? How are you currently structuring your programs, and what interactions are you enabling when you come to think about learning and development and the type of programs that you're offering? And that's actually, I guess we ran through this super fast. I know we have about 10 more minutes left, but I do want to open it up to any questions that people may have. And I'll check the comments too.
Oh, hi, Helen. Great presentation. Thank you very much for everything. We do have a question here. So the question is, how do we assess learning effectiveness for in-person training with this framework? Given the ideal design is to make the learning process personalized to each learner possible.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it would take going into that in-person training and seeing how it's being structured. Are there different interactions that are being enabled in that environment? So I've gone to classes on Zoom where there are breakout rooms. So in that situation, you are enabling a learner to small group interaction. I've been in situations where even in that session, perhaps people are pairing off. That's a learner to learner interaction. Perhaps they're interacting with content or a challenge or a project. That could be learner to content or also learner to group interaction. So it's a great question because as I mentioned before, without a further analysis or kind of more observation of those types of sessions, it's really hard to say if those learning, and it's quite possible that you could have many aspects of the PLIF within an instructor-led training, but without observing them, it's hard to tell.
So I do have a question. Were you able to evaluate differences between like small to medium to larger organizations applying this, or are you just doing this with bigger organizations?
So far, we have, I can go back to that slide. We haven't quite gotten to that level of granularity. And I think that would be a great next step to seeing if there are differences between large, middle-sized, and smaller organizations. So I think that's an excellent question and one that we should take to discuss as a next step.
Okay, good. Thank you.